Welcome to ThreatTank, a podcast covering the latest threat intelligence, threat response, and insights about the threat landscape around the globe. I'm your host, Tom Gorup, Vice President of Security Services at Edgio, and joining me today are Richard Yu, Senior Director of Product Management for Edgio Security Solutions, Andrew Johnson, Senior Product Marketing Manager, also for Edgio Security Solutions. Welcome, Richard, Andrew.
Hey, thanks for having me here.
Thanks, Tom. Good to see
This
you,
is,
Richard.
this is exciting. Our first Threat Tank podcast, and I got two heavy hitters like yourselves. And I feel like I need to open up with an icebreaker, a nice little question. I used to ask interviewees when I see them kind of get nervous, but I think this is a good intro. So I'm gonna ask you both, and just answer when you get it. If you were a tree, what would be your favorite animal? If you were a tree, what would be your favorite animal?
When you talk about trees, right? I start thinking about acorn, and then you know what immediately reminds me of? There's this pig in Spain. It's called Iberico pig. It's black. It produced the best bacon or ham, whatever you call it, in the world. It's most expensive. It's like probably a few $100 per ounce. So I guess in this case, the pig for me, because it makes use of whatever I drops and
All right. That's interesting. Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. First, I was like, where are you going with this? But
turn that to go, like turn my acorn to go.
yeah. No, the pig getting use out of that, and then not to mention selling for thousands of dollars a pound. That's like a Wagyu pig.
That's pretty good. Let's see. So I was thinking maybe from a security perspective of what I wouldn't want as an animal if I were
That's
a tree
fair.
myself. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't want fungus. I wouldn't want anything that wouldn't want a woodpecker or something that's gonna peck me up and make a hole in me.
Hey,
But
dude, I'm gonna stop you here. Hey, fungus is not animal. Last I checked.
what's that?
Oh, maybe it is. After we watch Last of Us, fungus becomes animal.
Yeah.
So that's what I wouldn't want. So I would have to say maybe some birds or something that just gotta just leave after they're land on me.
Yeah, again, making use. That's good. One of the answers I had gotten asking that question was a shark, and when I asked why, they're like, "Well, the shark would never bother me." I was like, "Okay,
I like
well,
that.
that speaks a little bit into the personality there." But I like how both of you guys, picked an animal that is of use to other animals. That's pretty cool. Speaks a lot. So we're not here talking today about about animals or trees for that matter.
I'm
We're
out.
going to dig into three predictions really into 2024. There's a blog post out on Edgio blog where we're talking about again three predictions. One being AI bridging the cybersecurity skills gap, security culture, and the rise of attacks. So we're not going to do it in that order, but those are the three predictions. So jumping right in to AI. I mean, right now, the prediction here, again, I'll reiterate that, is AI is building, will be bridging the cybersecurity skills gap in 2024. We'll see a lot of that. Now, in thinking about that, you can get provocative here and look at the world of AI and see everybody's got, I think I saw a tweet the other day. AI has everyone seeing stars. Everybody's excited and all these different use cases. We might, you see that new phone or pseudo phone rabbit R or something to that effect. Like all this crazy stuff coming out. But do we really think that AI is where it's at to effectively bridge the gap? Like, do we really see that happening in 2024, or do we got another 5 years of R&D behind AI before it gets to the point where it's making meaningful impacts in bridging that gap?
Well, it certainly breached the gap for the attacker.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, like I mean, like nowadays, I just think about, I mean, my day job. Hey, I want to run a script. I want to, hey, just write me a script that run a loop that help me make a request, make a get request or post request to this particular URL, and like do it 100 times repeatedly. I mean, obviously, you don't tell the AI to try to generate a DDoS attack but it functionally achieve the same, right? Just skirt around terms and conditions. I think it's gonna make red teamings like popular. It's gonna make it. Any layman can do it. Like anybody can decide. You know what? I'm just gonna put on my black hat, which I have it in me, and start playing around with that. But obviously, there's also a lot of benefits for organization, for blue team, for defender as well, right?
I think, I mean, obviously it's going to help the problem. Is it going to close it in 2024? That's, of course, I mean, I don't know. I think, of course, not. But it's already starting to be, implemented in security software. But, it also has challenges too. Like, I mean, instead of people worried about false positives, you have to kind of worry about false recommendations
Hmm.
that AI-backed software is going to give teams. So I think level of experience is still going to be extremely important.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we look at some stats like ISC Square, it says there's around a 4 million workforce gap, 4 million person workforce gap. That's huge. That's huge, and I mean, colleges aren't pumping out security professionals fast enough to fill that gap. Not to mention the growth that's going to happen year over year. So, AI closing that gap in 2024. On one side, I hear you, Richard. Like the value I see too is, to your point, can I write scripts quickly? The other day, I asked it to uh, GPT-4 to write me an HTML page, and it did. It did a great job. Then I started asking it to tweak and move. Next thing you know, I have an entire web page built in about 30 minutes, and I literally wrote zero code to accomplish that. But also being able to feed it various data sets. And I think one of the biggest concerns that people have with AI bridging the gap is privacy. Right? Accidentally putting. We saw what was it? Was a Samsung engineer who put in some schematics into AI. But the challenge was I hadn't seen anybody extract that yet. Not to say that it hasn't happened, but so there's kind of two sides of that coin.
I think it's very important. Like as you start using AI to both, well, obviously from an attacker perspective and defender perspective, right, enhance your workflow, right. It's also important to you protect your AI. But I think back to the talk about like closing the gaps. I would say, I mean, can the gaps ever be closed? No. Can just like I would say, can somebody ever be 100% secure? I'll argue that no, there's just no such things. To me, like the AI, what it does is that it adds an additional layers in our defense in-depth concept that really helps. It's another two sets in the layers that really help. I mean, from defender perspective, right? Close like and reduce as much of probability of a breach and like an attack from happening. And I believe like a lot of security issues happens. We always say humans are weakest link because if you keep doing the mundane stuff over and over and over again,
Mm.
we'll get complacent, accident happens, etc. This is when AI can come in. You probably heard this quote from this very famous persons that make cars and rockets that lends itself. But it's true that, and it's also true in security. Like when you just have to do a lot of repetitive stuff, even like logs and asses, whatever. Um, you know, people has a lapse in attention, and it's understandable. We're all humans anyway, right? So this is where I think AI will be very useful in closing the gap. But that's provided that the AI is doing the jobs that you wanted. Just like a robots in a factory is not suddenly grabbing the workers and like throw it on top of the cars and
Not
smash
yet.
it, right?
Not yet.
Not yet.
No, that's interesting. So, when I think about the workflow, so the analyst workflow, an alert comes in, and there's a lot of questions surrounding that particular alert, right? Is this normal? Is it common? What should I be looking for this sort of an attack on this particular type of system? Hey, it's a Windows machine or it's an Apache server. Are there certain things that I should be looking for to determine whether or not this attack was successful? And I think the opportunity we have potentially is to also lower the barrier of entry, right? So when we talk about closing the gap, it doesn't necessarily mean that AI is maybe filling the gap, but maybe AI is allowing us to broaden our reach for whom we're hiring for those sorts of roles. And the future that I get excited about is one where we're hiring less for the technical expertise on a particular product or technology, but rather hiring for curiosity and communication skills. So someone who can ask the right question in the right way to get the answers that they're looking for, not only from the data, but even from AI for that matter.
I think the last part you mentioned is really good in terms of like thinking differently to fill, to be able to even get close to filling this gap in security professionals. Hiring on creativity, maybe taking folks with other technical skills like from help desk or maybe business intelligence analysts or people who are very comfortable working with data. But also some of the stuff you said earlier, Tom, where if there's an incident and the AI can maybe recommend, at least look in a few areas. Like I think of my life and a lot of my work is like the 80-20 rule. So, if I don't have to track down like all these considerations, or if I have maybe the easiest considerations like there for me, it saves a lot of time. So I assume that we're going to see that in a lot of solutions and systems going forward.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like I want to double click on the the 4 million job like gaps in security. That this is a very important point. Like if you just look at average income and then you just extrapolate it, it comes out to about $200 billion. Which funny enough, like according to a report by one of the biggest security companies, right? That like 200 billion, in fact, that's specifically 213 billion is exactly the size of cybersecurity markets. And so it's understandable that corporations, like when we're talking about security providers, service providers, or even organizations, they're trying to fill these gaps. Imagine how cheaply you can run AI nowadays to achieve like certain functionality. Like there's potentially a lot of savings for that.
Yeah, 100%. I also see an opportunity for what you had mentioned too, Andrew, is like, and I think you did it as well, Richard, is being able to actually apply your controls within the AI itself. So if you have a standard process internally for a brute force attack or a ransomware attack, being able to train an AI, what everybody is going to answer those particular questions, you can have a consistency in response across your entire organization. It's one of the biggest challenges I know CISOs have is they write all these guidelines, all this documentation, and nobody reads it. You go through compliance at the end of the year and everybody's forced to read it, but does anybody actually sit down and read it? Now imagine if you had an AI that you could ask those questions to. So rather than, you still have the documentation, but the AI is trained on that documentation. And when the circumstances arises, a person, whether it's a security analyst or the CFO, can ask questions to the AI. Hey, what's the next step in this incident? What do we do next? And AI can be your Sherpa in that way.
It's funny, like I'll tell you, this is my last joke before we move on. But I guarantee you, nobody would hack the HTML and remove the component that block the buttons from, so that you can just click next in your compliance training. That's not happening.
Exactly. Or compliance training, that's a whole nother. We'll talk about culture here in a minute and how that's adjusted. So the one last time on this point, Richard, you talked about it earlier, was attackers leveraging GPT, leveraging AI. You have like Wolf GPT, Worm GPT, Fraud GPT, all these kind of LLMs focused on like, hey, how do I make it easier to be a bad guy? And the way I'm looking at it is, if you're not using it as a defender, how do you even stand a chance against an offender, an attacker who's leveraging a capability that it's like, Richard, I feel like you'll have a good war analogy. It's like a F-15 fighter jet versus like, I don't know, like a warthog or something. You know, like those two can't have a dogfight. That's not going to end well with Warhawk. You know what I mean?
A Warhawk go burp.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. So the next, any other ideas on that? Because I mean, we could spend, I think, all day on AI, really. But ultimately, I do see it as, if defenders aren't using it today, if businesses aren't trying to find ways to build efficiencies, to bridge the skill gaps, or even to take on mundane workloads today, you're not going to be effective against defending against attackers who are leveraging this capability with no limitations, with no fear of data compromise. Like, they're not concerned about any of this. Sometimes, I guess, being a good guy, has its disadvantages, right? You're already crutched in that way.
Hey, like we always say, right? We have to be right all the time, but the attacker just needs to be right one time.
It's true, and they don't have any limits, right?
And they're on the bleeding edge. Like, I can't believe like these Worm GPTs and other things. These were out in 2021, I think, that you could start to buy these services. I mean, a lot of other people, like, well, I'll just talk about myself, didn't really use like generative AI until this last year when it kind of blew up. But yeah, the adversaries are early adopters. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, totally. And it also opens up opportunity, as we see economy kind of shift. People are looking for new ways to make money. How many spam calls, how many scams, texts are you seeing? And they're getting a little bit better. And GPT is probably to think for that. Anything good created for good can be used for evil as well. So the next prediction here is a rise in attacks, and it's kind of a broad brush on attacks, but we'll focus on, let's say, 3: ransomware attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, and zero-day attacks. We look at 2023, especially last quarter, healthcare just got slammed with ransomware attacks over and over again. We saw a number of 0 days, but the real question is, will it continue to grow? What does that growth look like? Is it getting pumped by media, and it's not necessarily as big of a problem as it looks like? I mean, that's a sort of provocative question I'd like to explore here.
I may have a controversial opinions on this. Like when we look at I guess maybe I'm overly pedantic. Like when we look at those attack, right? I feel like there's what the media reported that's in hype, and there's what we actually see. Even with that, like, for example, we talk about rise of DDoS attack, right? There's nuance behind that. DDoS attack is always happening, but what kind, right? We go from back in 2016. 2015, the great internet outage because the DNS provider got hit. I mean, that was Mirai botnet. That was primarily layer 3, layer 4, like a millions packets per second attack. Obviously bandwidths are huge, right? It's bandwidth, high bandwidth volume. But nowadays, we're seeing like what I think starting like late last year. I think I can't believe we're in 2024 already. Like we're talking about 2022, right? And we're talking about the rise of anonymous Sudan, QNets, the rise of applications attacks. We're talking about like the applications like layer 7, HTTP flood, right? Going from a record 20 plus million requests per second to like now, what are we looking at? Like 300 million requests per second from Google. And that's with various exploits. So I also think that this attack is cyclical. It's like that they never go away. Like at one point, DDoS attack ransom was really high because obviously the Bitcoin pricing was spiking. Like now in this case, it's more because of geopolitical instability. over the past couple of years, and we see a rise of like state-sponsored DDoS attack, or even hacktivist, DDoS attack. So I think it's more like every year we're looking at like which attacks are in fashions, but next year it could be something else in fashions, and then the year later we're going back to like we're resetting back to like 2022, and something else in 2022 it's in fashion again.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if it's like, especially with like the tax on healthcare. I mean, I think it's part hype, but also, unfortunately, I think it's just sadder and worse today than it has been. And I think where hackers in the past may, at least it's been reported they have some ethics, like those seem to be out the window now, like with, attacking plastic surgeon clinics and threatening to release photos of patients unless the ransoms are paid, or swatting of patients. I think recently there was compromise of like a healthcare system, and they had a hospital network basically, and they had to actually send patients, change their patient routing, which is pretty messed up, really. So it's a,
You know what I show you? The attackers, right?
mhm.
They don't have to follow rules, and they're constantly pushing a boundary. So usually, what we look at these three things, right? You're attacking people for money. You're attacking the money, like financial institutions. Now they expanded the boundary a few years ago into educations. They're attacking schools, right? There are like reports of universities shutting down a couple of years ago. We can provide detail. Quote for that. But schools shutting down because the entire system literally just got, you know, locked lockdown, right? And now, and we see that we observe the boundary being pushed, like actually towards late 2025, or like late 2022 and early 2023. Yeah, I'm thinking 1 year ahead already. uh, and we're talking about hospital getting attacked. And again, like it started in war zones, right? But it sets a precedence, and now like hospitals are routinely getting hacked. It sometimes is life and death. Like Tom, you mentioned in your blog, we read it. It's like we're talking about there are situations where ambulance has to be redirected to another farther emergency room because of
Yeah.
security issues, right?
It's yeah. I mean, yeah. I just don't think you can expect anything better, especially when like there are people that are being forced into doing these attacks. It's not just some teenager in some random country doing these, but probably state sponsored that really they they really need that money to continue their operations. So I
So
don't
it's kind of
couldn't
like
imagine.
comes to like that. Then the question is like when it comes to like emerging attacks, right? What like what other boundaries are going to get pushed this year?
Hmm. That's a good question.
Yeah.
That's a good.
I don't have an answer for it,
Because I
so.
agree. I mean, hitting Q4 and seeing ambulances being diverted, emergency services being diverted to further hospitals, like that is putting life at risk. Right? There is no limitation to which direction that they could go next. I actually, I often so I worked a number of cases with the FBI a number of years back, and one in particular always stood out to me was a sextorting case where this guy was taking advantage of for 4 years this girl, and she was 18 when she finally said I was done. So since she was 14 years old, uh, it just shows a lot of like people are fallen and broken in that way, and they will show no limit. I saw recently there was another virtual ransom. I don't know if you've seen this yet, where they would text an individual, typically a teenager of sort, and it convinced them, probably through some nefarious way, to go hide somewhere, like in a forest, or just go hide, and then text
Mhm.
their parents that they've been kidnapped and that they need to send money somewhere. So, I mean that's it's just wild the
Yeah.
direction that some people will go. So that is an interesting question. Is like where do the crosshairs of these attackers move to? Maybe often it's follow the money though, right? So where's the money?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's crazy.
And there's the other attacks that you mentioned, rise of 0 days.
Yes.
That's actually notable. Like if we look at the statistic, right? I always track year over years, like CVE growth. We don't have predictions of 2024 yet, but 2023 with more than 23,000 CVE. That is more than 10% growth. And prior to that, we had more than 25% growth in CVEs.
Mhm.
It kind of speaks to the exponential problems we're dealing with, like the CVE is exponentially growing. I wonder if any of the security organizations in the audience here that actually have a double digits growth in security headcounts and budgets, year over year. I'm sure everybody gets to have like 10% more budgets and headcounts like every quarter. But that's what we've been observing, and it's interesting. The arm race, and it kind of ties back to the first topic, right? AI, it's important, but also because of the rise of 0 days. It's not just CVEs, but also like critical 0 days. We used to think of like we have Log4j, Springs for Shell, Confluence, like all of these things. It used to be like we see a couple of major one, high critical, like severity score 9 and above, like once or twice a year. Now it's like multiple times per quarter.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and a big challenge there, I think a lot of businesses running into is the response to those 0 days, right? The existence of 0 days, they've always been there. When we look at some of the historical ones like Bash Bug, I think that was there like 20 years before it was discovered. So sometimes I look at the rise of CVEs and I'm like, okay, we're doing a better job of reporting on vulnerabilities, but I'm sure there are that many, if not more, vulnerabilities um, that just don't have a label to them yet, right? They've yet to be discovered. Obviously, that's the 0 day conversation, but the rise of CVEs over time shows that we're doing a better job of reporting on these, but we're not doing a very good job of still like how do we effectively respond the emergency patch management process. Can you really roll out a patch that fast, or do you need some enablement on top of that? Like virtual patching, I always look at that as like a low hanging fruit opportunity to, hey, let's plug this hole while we go and fix the root problem, rather than trying to patch the whole thing, which can be expensive. It's risky, right? I mean, Log4j, how many patches were rolled out before it actually worked? I think it was 3. I think the third one finally, closed the hole. So,
And they're all within 2 weeks, I believe, if I remember. In the middle of December.
Yeah, that's miserable.
Wow, that's a lot of disruption.
Yeah, that's miserable. But so in the rise of 0 days too, I think you mentioned too, AI, I think will play a big part of that. I don't think we've seen that yet. I mean, we're seeing AI being used for defensive, like doing before you're checking in code, you can things like Copilot, make sure there's no vulnerabilities on that check-in. There's other like what SAST and DAST type tools that are enabling that, are starting to use AI. I would expect to see attackers leveraging AI to do vulnerability discovery, especially in open source projects as well. I mean, that's the easy.
Right. I mean, like ultimately, when you look at the workflow, right, from a defender perspective, when you're doing your black box tests or your white box tests, what nowadays we're calling like SaaS tests and like dynamic application security tests, right? It's really scanning for vulnerability and telling you to patch it. Obviously, like if the attacker get access to your repo, they can do the same. I mean, they don't even need to get you access to your repo if they're doing that test. They just hit your running software and they find this vulnerability. Well, guess what? What we see as a scan from a blue team perspective is a recon from an attacker perspective. If we just look at MITRE's attack framework, this is essentially a recon that allows us to launch the attack. So you always think about all of the tools and process you use. Think about how could the attacker use it and against you. And it's very important to recognize that. We always say, it's good to like put on the black hat again and think like an attacker. I think that will help a lot in implementing secure workflow, especially in secure CI/CD DevSecOps, nowadays workflow.
Yeah. So this is great, and we are over time. So our last topic here was more about culture. So I'd love for each of you to take like a few seconds, a minute, whatever you'd like to kind of give your perspective on probably what needs to change. So less of prediction, but looking at the businesses today, the problems that they're facing, everything we talked about from the resource constraints, attackers getting more effective, 0-day vulnerabilities, being discovered. So what do they need to look at? What does CISOs, how do they need to change their mindset going into 2024 and beyond? Like what needs to change for us to stop running these fire drills every week?
Well, one thing I just read about recently is a Gartner stat that I think it said about 25% of cybersecurity leaders are going to pursue completely different roles within 2 years. 50% are going to change jobs. So just and mostly attributable to stress in their job. And we know that CISO is a very difficult job, but a lot of security jobs are as well. So I mean, I think that there needs to be more planning in terms of rotating people, bringing maybe developers into security who don't have the security background. It needs to be more of a shared responsibility. A lot of organizations, security people are managing tons of solutions, right? So when there's an emergency, you might be going to one person every time, burning them out. So just more in terms of process and a culture of everybody being a part of security. I think might help. Yeah, this is one idea.
I love that.
I think, well, if we're looking at from a security leader perspective, right? You have to manage up, you have to manage laterally with your peer, let's say your CISO, and you have to like manage down, right? But I think it's very important to set up cultures. Like if we're looking at like from a lateral and up perspective, right? Expectation setting is very important. Like it's very, we always hear jokes that whenever a breach happens, CISOs get fired. That's why CISO has such a turnaround in the industry. I'm sure it's not happening like this anymore, right? But it really speaks to the expectations. We have to set the expectation right. As a product manager, like setting the expectation to the stakeholder is one of the most important part of my job, right? But setting expectations with the board of directors, with your peers, that there is, and I know, it's surprise, right? There's no such thing as 100% security. I once hear this from this guy called Dr. Eric Cole, like podcast, right? He's saying like, how do you make your phone 100% secure? You tossed it into a fire pit, right? Because 100% security means 0% functionality. As a security person, you cannot be dogmatic. Security, your first job is to drive the business. Security is like having a strong brake in a supercar, right? It allows a business to brake hard. Why do you need to brake hard? Because you want to go fast. That's the whole point. Like, so start thinking about how this impacts business. How it's because like it just because like if you want to be 100% secure and you want to have 100% guaranteed that you're gonna block all of it at the attack, well, you just go blacklist 0000/0, and you're good. Just call it a day. You're 100% KPI achieved. But that's not the point, right? You have to be accelerating like the business. You have to build that into a culture. And if you look from like going down perspective, right? Again, security starts from the beginning. Security starts from, again, another analogy I've used before. If you heard me in some other podcast, is that security is like making cake. It's not an icing on a cake. It's not an afterthought. It has to go from the first step of planning for a software, especially if you're a SaaS shop, if you're like a web based, you do most of your business online, right? You have to think about security is like the flour in the cake. It's there from day one, and when you make the cake, and in fact, if you're doing a good job, you shouldn't notice the flower when you get a cake. Like who notices the flower when you eat the cakes, right? And that's how security should be. So it should not be a dogmatic top down kind of like a compliance, like driven initiative. It has to be initiated, like and be ingrained, perhaps through like tighter collaborations, embedded security teams or like development team, like make sure that security is done right from day one. Because whatever you can prevent is stuff that your operations team, like they don't need to spend as much time on those.
Yeah, there's efficiencies with that, and I love the little quote there: "100% secure is 0% functionality." That's a good stat, and I completely agree. Culture is important. How do you build this into the foundation of your organization? Not so that becomes part of the conversation, and not, hey, oh, we got to get the security team involved. We should be having that conversation from day zero, but you need to make it interesting. The one thing that I've you look at that compliance training, it's boring. It's not relevant. It's not timely. We need to change that to make security interesting. I remember 10 years ago trying to talk to people about security and their eyes would glaze over. Then all of a sudden it started making headlines and everybody just got super interested in it. And I think it can go right back the other direction if we start boring people again with monotonous trainings and the like. Let's make it timely. Let's make it relevant. And again, let's build that at the core, the foundation of our business, where security is not an afterthought. It's part of the cake. But I'm no baker either. So
Everyone needs to start putting on their black hat. When you browse a website, see, hey, what could go wrong? Like, put on your black hat. Hey, is there a form for you? Is there something I put in the form?
yeah,
Hey, what is the API endpoint? Hey, what happened if I spam that? Like start thinking, start putting a hacker mindset. Wear your black hat, and view that as a culture in your company.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So we are way over, but I'd say this was great. First episode of ThreatTank. So I appreciate you both being on. If everyone wants to stay up to date with the latest threat intelligence from Edgio, you can go subscribe at Edgio, edge.io. Again, that's edg.io. Great having you guys. Until next time.
Thanks a lot.
See you. Happy New Year.